The morning I found the sale agreement folded inside a takeout menu in the kitchen drawer, I sat down at the table, placed it flat in front of me, and read it 3 times without blinking. My hands were steady, my coffee was still warm, and in the margin of that document, in handwriting that wasn't mine, was everything I needed to know about the man I had married 11 years earlier. My name is Raven. I'm 37 years old, and what happened next is the kind of thing most people only believe when they see the paperwork themselves. 6 weeks ago, on a Tuesday morning in late October, I discovered that my husband, Marcus, had signed a purchase agreement to sell our home, a 4-bedroom craftsman in Portland, Oregon that I had helped buy, renovate, and pay for over the course of a decade, to a real estate investor named Glenn Whitfield for $487,000. The closing date was set for November 9th, less than 3 weeks away. What Marcus had apparently failed to account for, in all of his careful, quiet planning, was one very specific legal detail. A detail my grandmother had insisted on 11 years ago, on a rainy Thursday afternoon in a lawyer's office downtown, when she'd looked me in the eyes and said, "You put your name on that deed, Raven. Both names. Non-negotiable." I hadn't understood why she pressed so hard that day, not until 6 weeks ago. But before I tell you what happened in that lawyer's office when the truth came out, I need to take you back. Not to the beginning of my marriage, but to the beginning of what I now understand was a very long, very slow unraveling. One I missed entirely because I was too busy trusting someone who had stopped deserving it. Before I continue, if this story is already hitting somewhere real for you, subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I find it genuinely moving to know who's on the other side of the screen. Okay, let me take you back to where this truly started. I grew up in a small house in Eugene, Oregon, raised by my grandmother, Adele, after my parents separated when I was 6. My mother moved to Phoenix. My father moved on to a second family in Sacramento. What I had was Grandma Adele, her garden, her kitchen that always smelled of cardamom and warm bread, and her voice. Low, unhurried, certain. She was a retired paralegal who had worked for the same family law firm for 31 years, and she believed above all else in documentation. "Words fade," she used to say, pressing her fingers to her temple. "Paper doesn't forget." I was young enough to find it charming, without understanding how serious she was. I became a forensic accountant. I know, not glamorous, but I am exceptionally good at it. By the time I was 32, I was a senior investigator at a mid-sized firm in Portland, auditing financial misconduct for corporate clients and, occasionally, for legal proceedings. I had a particular talent for finding what people had tried to hide. Numbers, I always said, leave a trail even when the person who made them believes the trail has gone cold. My colleagues joked that I had the patience of someone who had already seen the ending. They weren't wrong. I met Marcus Cole at a fundraiser in the spring of 2012. He was charming in the way that some men are charming, attentively, specifically, as if you were the only person in the room who mattered. He was an architectural project manager, broad-shouldered and easy laughing, and he had a way of making plans feel certain. We dated for 2 years. We married in a small ceremony on June 7, 2014, in a garden outside of Ashland. 26 guests. Grandma Adele sat in the front row in a lavender dress, and when I walked past her, she reached out and squeezed my hand once, firmly. I still remember the dry warmth of her palm. When Marcus and I bought the house in Portland the following year, it was Grandma Adele who insisted on being present at the signing. She drove the 2.5 hours herself. She sat across from the closing attorney with her reading glasses perched on her nose and went through every page with the patience of a woman who had witnessed too many people sign things they hadn't read. When we reached the deed of ownership, she looked at Marcus, then at me, and said clearly, "Both names, equal interest." Marcus smiled the way he did when he found something slightly unnecessary. The attorney noted it. The deed was drafted with both Raven Cole and Marcus Cole listed as co-owners with equal rights to the property. We drove home in separate cars. Grandma Adele called me from the road and said, "Good. Now you're protected." I said, "From what?" She paused for a moment and said, "From whatever you can't see yet." I laughed. I thought she was being melodramatic. She passed away in February of 2020 at the age of 81. I still have her reading glasses in a small box on my dresser. The first sign that something had shifted in Marcus came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a silence. A new quality of silence. Measured, deliberate. The kind that arrives when someone has begun keeping a second set of books, metaphorically speaking. I noticed it in 2021. He stopped talking about our finances the way he used to. When I asked about the mortgage statements, he said he had set up automatic payments. When I asked about our joint savings account, he said the balance was fine. I let it go longer than I should have. I told myself I was too close to it to be objective. That's the particular trap of being good at your job. You sometimes convince yourself that your instincts don't apply to your own life. By March of 2022, Marcus had stopped wearing his wedding ring at home. He said it was bothering his finger. I didn't press it. I started quietly to watch. I noticed he'd opened a new email account. I noticed 2 trips he described as work conferences had no corresponding hotel receipts in our shared credit card statements. I noticed a new number appearing in his recent calls, 14 times in 1 month, a number registered to a woman named Brooke, whose last name I eventually confirmed through public records. I didn't confront him. I was building a file. In early September of last year, a colleague of mine, a real estate attorney named Patricia Huang, mentioned offhandedly over lunch that she'd seen our address listed in a preliminary property transaction filing. She thought it was odd that I hadn't mentioned selling. I set down my fork very carefully. I said, "Can you send me that filing?" She did. That evening, alone in my home office with the rain coming down hard outside and the radiator clicking steadily beside me, I opened the document. There it was. A signed purchase agreement dated August 28th, Marcus's signature, the buyer's name, $487,000, the closing date of November 9th. Not one trace of my name, not one attempt to involve me. An 11-year marriage, a home we had built together, a life I believed in, sold, apparently, like a piece of furniture he no longer needed. I didn't cry that night. I made a different decision. I called Patricia at 9:17 p.m. She answered on the second ring. I explained what I had found. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Raven, does your name appear on the deed?" I said yes. She said, "Then he can't sell it. Not legally. Not without your signature." Another silence, longer this time. Then she said, "He doesn't know that, does he?" I said, "He's about to find out." If you've ever had the moment where the grief burns off and what's left underneath is something quieter and much more certain, type deed in the comments. I read every single one of them. Over the next 2 weeks, I did what I do. I documented. Patricia pulled the full title history on our property and confirmed what Grandma Adele had made certain 11 years ago. The deed listed both Raven Cole and Marcus Cole as joint tenants with equal ownership rights. Under Oregon law, a jointly owned property cannot be sold by one owner without the other's written consent and signature. The purchase agreement Marcus had signed was not only unauthorized, it was legally unenforceable. He had sold something he did not, in any legal sense, own alone. I also obtained, through proper legal channels, the bank records associated with a secondary account Marcus had opened in October of 2021. The account showed 22 transfers totaling $63,400, moved from our joint savings into this account over 14 months. He had been quietly, methodically draining our shared finances. Whether he was planning to disappear with the sale proceeds or simply restart his life somewhere else with someone else, I couldn't know for certain. But the pattern was unmistakable to anyone trained to see it. Patricia filed a formal notice with the county recorder's office, placing a hold on any transfer of the property pending resolution of the co-ownership dispute. The buyer, Glenn Whitfield, received a letter from Patricia's office explaining that the sale agreement was legally invalid, as the co-owner of record had not signed or consented to the transaction. I need to pause for just a moment here. If you can feel what I was feeling in those 2 weeks, that particular cold calm that comes when you stop hoping and start knowing, type "I understand" in the comments. Because that feeling is something very specific. It doesn't feel like strength exactly. It feels like clarity. I let Marcus believe the sale was proceeding normally until October 31st. I want you to understand the deliberateness of that date. It was a Sunday evening. We had no plans. I asked him to sit down at the kitchen table, the same table where I had found the agreement 6 weeks earlier, and I placed a folder in front of him. He looked at it the way people look at things they aren't sure how to categorize. He asked what it was. I said, "Open it." The kitchen was very still. The overhead light cast a pale gold across the table. I could hear the neighbor's dog barking once in the distance, then going quiet. I watched his face as he opened the folder and saw the first page, a certified copy of our property deed, with both names listed clearly. I watched the color leave his face the way water leaves the bathtub. Slow at first, then all at once. He said, "Raven." I said, "Page 2. Page 2 was the county recorder's hold notice, dated October 14th. He said, "I can explain." I said, "Page 3. Page 3 was a summary of the 22 bank transfers, $63,400, 14 months, his name, his secondary account, his signature on every authorization. He set the papers down. His hands had begun to tremble. I noticed that in a very specific, almost clinical way, the slight unsteadiness of his fingers, the rigidity of his jaw, the way he couldn't quite decide where to look. He opened his mouth twice without producing words. I let the silence do what it does. It did the work that any words I might have chosen could never have done as well. Finally, he said, "I was going to tell you." I said, "You were going to be in another state with $487,000 and a head start." He didn't deny it. I thought of Grandma Adele then, specifically of the afternoon in that lawyer's office in 2015, her reading glasses on, her finger on the page, her voice saying, "Both names, equal interest." She had sat across from this man and she had known something. I didn't understand what she meant that day. Not for another 11 years. Now I understood completely. She hadn't been protecting me from a hypothetical. She'd been protecting me from the exact, specific thing that was sitting across the table from me in that kitchen, hands trembling, with nowhere left to go. I said, "Your attorney will hear from Patricia by Monday morning." He said, "Raven, please." I said, "The house is not being sold. The hold will remain until the divorce is finalized, and the property is valued and distributed according to Oregon law. The $63,400 will be addressed in the settlement as dissipation of marital assets." I stood up, picked up my folder, and walked out of the kitchen. The consequences arrived quickly after that. Marcus moved out on November 3rd, 6 days before the closing date that was never going to happen. Glenn Whitfield's legal team sent a formal complaint to Marcus's personal attorney regarding the fraudulent sale agreement. The divorce filing was submitted on November 7th. Patricia had estimated the full property settlement, accounting for the unauthorized transfers and current market valuation, would result in a final division that meaningfully favored me. The specific numbers were still being finalized as of the last time we spoke, but the direction was not in doubt. 2 weeks after Marcus left, his mother Eleanor called me. I hadn't spoken to her in months. She was quiet at first, and then she said that she had known Marcus had been in a difficult place, but that she hadn't known the extent of it. She said she was sorry. I told her I appreciated that she called. I told her that I wished Marcus had been honest before it came to this, and that whatever relationship she and I might have going forward would depend entirely on her understanding that I would not be revisiting these events to make anyone feel better about them. She said she understood. I believed her. In mid-November, on a Saturday morning, exactly 18 days after that kitchen table conversation, I sat alone in the back sunroom with a cup of coffee and the light coming in low and golden through the south-facing windows. The garden outside was quiet. The maple in the backyard had gone fully amber, and the leaves were coming down in the clean November wind, one or two at a time. I sat there for a long time without doing anything in particular, just breathing, just being in the house that was mine. I thought about documentation, about paper, about a woman in a lavender dress pressing her palm to mine at a garden wedding, and about the specific, irreplaceable gift of someone who loves you enough to protect you from what you can't yet see. I thought about the truth that I had spent my entire career proving in other people's lives, that the numbers always tell the story, that the paper never forgets, that the only real protection is the kind you put in writing before you need it. What I learned through all of this is something I want to offer you carefully, because I don't believe in easy lessons drawn from difficult things. But this is what I know. The people who love you most are often the ones trying to teach you something you're not ready to hear yet. Pay attention to them. Write down what they tell you. And if someone ever hands you a document and says, "Both names, non-negotiable," trust them, especially when you can't see why yet. If this story reached you in some way, I'd love to know. What's the most important lesson someone you loved tried to teach you before you were ready to understand it? Leave it in the comments. I read every one. And if you know someone who's in a situation where they've trusted the wrong person for too long, share this with them. Sometimes you don't need advice. Sometimes you just need to hear that someone else found their way through. If you're new to this channel, subscribe and look in the description. There's another story waiting for you there. Thank you for being here with me all the way to the end. I'll see you very soon.